Imagine you're in a relationship and you feel something isn't right. He seems distant, his words don't match his actions, and deep down, a voice inside you whispers that something doesn't add up. Is it paranoia, or a sign that he's just using you? Carl Jung taught us that the human psyche doesn't hide its intentions for long. The unconscious always finds a way to reveal itself, whether through small gestures, repetitive attitudes, or even silence. And what if I told you there are clear patterns that show when a man isn't genuinely interested in you, but only in what he can get out of the relationship? The human mind operates through symbols and archetypes, and relationships are no exception. Since ancient times, the same stories repeat themselves. The man who manipulates, promises, and disappears when you need him most, deceives you with crumbs of attention, makes you feel like you're one step away from getting what you want, but never gives you anything real. And the worst part? He knows exactly how to keep this game going without you realizing it. If you've ever been through this, or feel like you might be stuck in this dynamic right now, get ready. Over the next few minutes, you'll discover 8 attitudes that a man who's only using you and isn't truly interested always displays. Some are so subtle they go unnoticed. Others are obvious, but maybe you've learned to overlook them. The question is, are you seeing the signs, or are you fooling yourself to avoid facing the truth? Stick with me until the end, because the 8th attitude is the one that traps women the most in relationships, where they'll never be a priority. The first attitude of a man who's only using you and isn't genuinely interested is a lack of real commitment. At first, he might seem captivating, charming, saying the right words and showing up at the perfect moments to keep your interest. But soon you realize that even though he's present at times, there's always an air of uncertainty, like something doesn't quite fit. Carl Jung teaches us that this behavior reflects an internal conflict between what a man projects to the world and what's really hidden in his unconscious. He doesn't want to be alone, but he doesn't want real commitment either. It's precisely this oscillation between presence and absence that keeps you trapped in his game. The uncertainty isn't an oversight, it's a powerful psychological tool. The more you try to figure out what he's feeling, the more emotionally invested you become, turning you into a prisoner of the idea of winning him over. The human mind is wired to crave what seems unattainable. Jung would explain this as a manifestation of the illusion archetype, a recurring pattern in the human psyche that makes us idealize what we're not sure we can have. This kind of man never clearly says what he feels, but hints just enough to keep you waiting. If you ask where the relationship is going, he dodges the answer. If you demand a clear stance, he says he doesn't want to rush things, or prefers to let things flow naturally. But that flow only exists for his benefit. Deep down, he's not heading anywhere. He's just prolonging a game where he always wins while you stay trapped in the hope that he'll change someday. This behavior deeply impacts the feminine unconscious. Jung spoke of the anima and animus, the feminine and masculine aspects present in each person. Women who get involved with men like this often carry an unconscious belief that love must be earned, that if they're patient and do everything right, he'll eventually recognize their worth. But this is a dangerous illusion. This type of man isn't looking for love. He's looking for convenience. And convenience doesn't require commitment, just your emotional availability. He feeds off your hope because he knows that as long as you believe there's a chance, you'll keep accepting less than you deserve. The question Jung would ask you here is, why do you accept this kind of relationship? What's inside you that keeps this pattern alive? The answer isn't in him. It's in something much deeper within you. Our shadow, as Jung called it, holds all the unconscious pains, fears, and beliefs that shape our choices. Maybe you've learned to confuse intermittent attention with real affection. Maybe you fear being alone, so you settle for any kind of presence, even if it's shallow and inconsistent. But the truth is this: until you face that hidden part of yourself, you'll keep attracting men who only use you and will never truly commit. The second attitude is emotional coldness, disguised as independence. At first, he might seem like a confident man, someone who values his freedom and doesn't get caught up in drama. But over time, you realize this independence is just a shield to avoid any real connection. Carl Jung teaches us that we all project hidden parts of our psyche onto others, and this kind of man projects an image of strength and detachment to hide his own inability to truly engage. He doesn't share deep feelings, avoids heartfelt conversations, and when you try to get closer, he responds vaguely or changes the subject. This emotional barrier isn't accidental. It's there to keep you close, without him having to offer anything in return. The psychological game becomes even clearer when you start expressing your own emotions. If you show affection, he pulls away. If you try to talk about something that hurts you, he makes you feel like you're overreacting. Jung spoke of the duality between what we show the world and what we hide from ourselves, and these men carry a deep contradiction within. They want a woman's presence, but without the weight of intimacy. They want someone to fill their momentary voids without any emotional responsibility. And the worst part? The more you try to break through that barrier and reach something real, the more he makes you feel inadequate for wanting more. This triggers a dangerous unconscious mechanism. Jung explained that the feminine unconscious often seeks to heal emotional wounds through relationships, which is why some women are drawn to men who can't love them back. There's an unconscious illusion that if you're patient enough, if you prove your worth, he'll eventually open up and realize how special you are. But that change never comes, not because of you, but because the issue was never you. This type of man doesn't have emotional blocks that your love can heal. He's made a conscious choice to keep that distance because it benefits him. The cruelest part of this cycle is that the more you get involved, the harder it becomes to see the manipulation. Jung spoke about the shadow, the hidden side of our personality that holds everything we deny about ourselves. Often women who get involved with men like this carry an unconscious belief that they need to prove their worth, that love must be earned, and that if they're patient enough, he'll finally see them for who they are. But this kind of man never delivers what you hope for because silent manipulation doesn't have an end goal. It exists only to keep you under his control. The question Jung would have us reflect on is, why do you feel drawn to someone who always leaves you uncertain? What's inside you that's learned to confuse this instability with passion? The unconscious is tricky, and sometimes we seek in others what we need to heal within ourselves. But real love doesn't put you in a state of anxiety, doesn't make you question your own worth, doesn't keep you in a game where the rules are never clear. If this man only gives you enough to keep you trying, maybe it's time to stop and ask yourself why you keep playing. The fourth attitude is a lack of emotional reciprocity, disguised as nonchalance. At first he might seem relaxed, someone who doesn't demand much and appears content with any situation. But as the relationship progresses, you start to notice a strange imbalance. You make the effort, you care, you try to keep the connection alive while he just takes. Carl Jung teaches us that relationships reflect what we carry in our unconscious, and if a man doesn't match your dedication, it means you are never a priority to him. But he'll never say it outright. Instead, he creates the illusion that everything's fine, while benefiting from your emotional investment without giving anything back. The dynamic becomes more evident over time. If you're available, he pulls away. If you get tired and start to distance yourself, he notices and reels you back in with minimal gestures, just enough to reignite your hope. Jung explained that the human psyche moves through repetitive patterns, and this tactic of pulling away and drawing closer isn't random. It keeps you in this cycle because he knows uncertainty breeds attachment. You feel like you're constantly trying to balance the relationship, seeking to understand what he wants, waiting for the moment he'll finally reciprocate. But that moment never comes because he's not there to build something real, just to soak up everything you're willing to give without truly committing. The most dangerous thing is that this lack of reciprocity can be mistaken for a personality trait. He might say that's just how he is, that he doesn't like pressure, or that he shows his feelings differently. But Jung warns us that when a relationship isn't balanced, there's always a hidden truth we don't want to see. If you're always the one reaching out, solving problems, or compromising to avoid conflict, then this isn't a partnership. It's one-sided. And the longer you stay in it, the more you get used to receiving less than you deserve, believing it's normal. The big question Jung would ask here is, why do you keep giving to someone who never gives back? What's inside you that believes you need to keep trying with someone who clearly isn't willing to offer more than the bare minimum? The unconscious can trap us in vicious cycles, but it can also free us if we're brave enough to face it. You deserve a relationship where there's balance, where your effort is valued and returned. And if this man only knows how to take without giving, maybe what needs to change isn't him. It's your decision to keep accepting it. The fifth attitude is subtle devaluation disguised as a joke. At first he might seem witty, funny, even charming with his laid-back attitude, but over time you realize his comments about you aren't as harmless as they seem. He might tease you about how you dress, downplay your achievements, suggest you could try harder, or casually compare you to other women. Carl Jung teaches us that the human psyche operates in layers, and this behavior reveals more about him than it does about you. He projects his own insecurities and desire for control through seemingly innocent words that deep down chip away at your self-esteem and make you question your worth. This tactic is insidious because it doesn't come across as direct criticism. He might say something like, "Wow, you're so sensitive," when he notices one of his jokes has hurt you. If you defend yourself, he flips it around and makes it seem like you're overreacting. Jung explained that the unconscious is governed by behavioral patterns, and this kind of emotional manipulation happens when someone wants to exert control without seeming aggressive. He wants you to feel insecure because an insecure woman is easier to manipulate. So without realizing it, you start changing how you act, dress, or even think, trying to fit into what he approves of or deems acceptable. The most dangerous part is that this devaluation isn't always overt. Sometimes he compliments you, but with a hint of irony, or makes subtle remarks that leave you doubting yourself. Jung teaches us that how others treat us reflects what we allow within ourselves. If you find yourself justifying his behavior, believing he's just kidding or didn't mean it, you might be ignoring a destructive pattern that's taken root in the relationship. The truth is, someone who truly values you would never use words to diminish you, not even under the guise of humor or honesty. Jung would have us question, why do you accept this treatment? What's inside you that lets you overlook these comments even though you know they hurt? Sometimes we learn from a young age that love and criticism go hand in hand, that being loved means enduring small humiliations, that we need to adapt to be accepted. But that belief needs to be shattered. Real love strengthens. It doesn't weaken. And if a man makes you feel less, if he uses his words to reduce rather than uplift, maybe it's time to see that the problem isn't you. It's how he chooses to treat you. The sixth attitude is calculated emotional distancing. He doesn't ignore you completely, but he's never fully present either. There seems to be an invisible barrier between you, something that keeps you from truly reaching him. Carl Jung teaches us that the human psyche creates masks to protect itself, and this type of man hides behind an emotional wall to avoid any deep connection. At first, you might think he's just reserved or needs time to open up. But as days, weeks, or even months go by, you realize this distance isn't a phase. It's a choice. He always keeps a part of himself locked away, and the more you try to get closer, the more he pulls back. The psychological game becomes clear when you notice how little he shares about himself. You might know his habits, preferences, even his routine, but never his fears, traumas, or deepest emotions. When you ask how he feels, he responds vaguely, without committing. When you try to create a moment of connection, he changes the subject or makes it seem like you're asking too much. Jung explained that some people avoid deepening relationships because they fear what they might uncover within themselves. But for this type of man, that barrier isn't just a defense mechanism, it's a strategy. He knows that by keeping this emotional distance, he makes you try harder to win him over, tying you to him in an almost hypnotic way. This cycle of closeness and distance deeply affects your unconscious. Jung said our mind seeks to fill the empty spaces in our psyche, and when someone remains inaccessible, it creates an almost obsessive desire to understand and conquer them. You feel like if you try a little harder, if you're more understanding, maybe you'll break through that barrier. But the truth is, that barrier isn't there by accident. It's what keeps the game going. He never fully gives himself because he knows that doing so would mean losing control over the relationship's dynamic. The question Jung would have us reflect on here is, why do you feel this need to reach someone who clearly doesn't want to be reached? What's inside you that believes this struggle is worth it? Sometimes we carry an unconscious belief that love must be hard, that the more we fight for someone, the more valuable the reward will be. But that belief is a trap. Real love isn't a maze where you have to prove your worth at every turn. If he really cared, he wouldn't keep you outside his life. And maybe the most important question isn't why he acts this way, but why you keep trying to get in. The seventh attitude is emotional inconsistency, a never-ending cycle of empty promises and sudden shifts. He can be sweet and attentive one moment, then distant and indifferent the next. One day he seems fully engaged, talking about the future and building expectations. The next, he acts like nothing happened. Carl Jung teaches us that the human psyche lives in constant conflict between what we show the world and what we truly feel. This type of man plays with that duality, alternating between closeness and distance to keep you emotionally hooked. He doesn't want to lose you, but he doesn't want to offer a real relationship either. And so, You find yourself on an emotional roller coaster where you never know which version of him you'll get. This inconsistency isn't random. Jung explained that people project onto others what they can't see within themselves, and in this psychological game, he projects a desire for control disguised as spontaneity. He might say he doesn't like labels, that he lives in the moment, that he doesn't want complications. But the truth is, he knows exactly what he's doing. He creates a sense of uncertainty to make you feel like you need to prove your worth, that you have to try harder to secure his attention. And the more he swings between affection and coldness, the more you cling to the idea that if you do everything right, you'll get back that version of him that seems in love. The impact on your unconscious is devastating. Jung spoke about how repetitive emotional patterns shape our relationships, and this inconsistency awakens an unconscious need for validation. You start to believe it's your fault, that maybe you weren't interesting enough that day, that maybe you said something wrong. But that guilt isn't yours. It's part of the subtle manipulation he builds. The truth is, he never intended to give you emotional stability. He feeds off the power he has over your emotions, the fact that he can shift your mood with a single gesture or word. The question Jung would lead us to ask is, why do you feel drawn to someone who keeps you in this cycle of confusion? What's inside you that makes unpredictability seem more appealing than stability? Often the unconscious links instability with passion, as if difficulty makes love more valuable. But that's a dangerous mistake. Real love isn't a puzzle to solve or an enigma to decipher. If he really cared, there wouldn't be a constant need to prove your worth. And maybe the biggest truth you need to face is this. His inconsistency isn't a lack of maturity or fear of commitment. It's a choice. And your choice needs to be to stop accepting it. The eighth attitude is selfishness disguised as freedom. He always puts his desires above yours, but he does it so subtly that for a while you think it's normal. If he wants to go out with his friends, he goes. If he needs space, he takes it. If you ask for something, he always has an excuse. He talks about independence, about how relationships shouldn't suffocate, but deep down, that freedom only works for him. You, on the other hand, feel like you're always walking on eggshells, trying not to seem demanding, trying to be understanding, while he carries on with his life as if your presence is just a convenient detail. Carl Jung teaches us that the ego is a master at crafting narratives to justify our actions, and this man uses the idea of freedom as an excuse to avoid offering anything beyond what's comfortable for him. But his freedom has a strange pattern. When you want space, too, it bothers him. When you start pulling away, he notices. And then, like clockwork, he reappears, not with real commitment, but with small gestures that reignite your hope. He says he misses you, that he's been thinking about you, that he wants to see you. But as soon as he senses you're re-engaged, he slips back into the same pattern of selfishness and detachment. Jung explained that some people don't love. They just need the other person to validate their existence. This man doesn't want to lose you, but he's not willing to give up his absolute freedom either. And so he keeps you trapped in a cycle where you're always the one adapting, the one compromising, while he never lifts a finger to balance the relationship. The most dangerous part of this behavior is that it makes you feel like any problem in the relationship is your fault. If you question him, he calls you controlling. If it hurts you, he says you're dramatic. If you try to set boundaries, he makes you feel like you're being unfair. Jung teaches us that we carry unconscious patterns that repeat throughout our lives, and often women who accept this behavior were raised to believe that asking for love and commitment is too much. But that belief needs to break, because real love doesn't make you feel like a burden. It doesn't force you to always walk toward the other person without them ever walking toward you. The question Jung would ask here is, why do you keep accepting less than you deserve? What's inside you that makes his freedom seem more important than your own needs? Healthy relationships aren't based on games, calculated distances, or empty promises. Real love is a balance between two people who choose to be together. And if you feel like you're always the only one trying, maybe the hardest truth is this: he was never really there. Now the choice is yours. The truth is, a man who's only using you will never tell you outright. He doesn't need to. His actions speak for themselves. And if you pay attention, you'll see the pattern always repeats: lack of commitment, emotional distancing, subtle manipulation, and selfishness disguised as freedom. Carl Jung teaches us that the human psyche projects onto others what we often don't want to see in ourselves. If you find yourself trapped in this kind of relationship, maybe it's time to ask, what's inside me that still believes I deserve less than real love? The good news is that when you recognize these patterns, you can break them. Love shouldn't be a battle where you have to prove your worth, or a game where the other person always holds the power. Jung said, self-knowledge is the path to liberation, and the greatest transformation begins when you decide you won't accept less than you deserve. The right man doesn't leave you with doubts. He doesn't make you question your worth. He doesn't keep you trapped in a cycle where you're always fighting to be seen. He's simply there. If this content helped you see something you needed to hear, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes a difference, so more people can access this knowledge and break free from toxic relationships. Comment below if you've been through something like this, and share this video with someone who needs to open their eyes. See you in the next video.